In this episode, we are going to be building an AI SDR, or rather taking an existing template and then converting it into our own version. So we're going to be covering why and when it's worth taking a workflow and turning it into code. So if you have a workflow that's hosted and maybe you're spinning up a bunch of tasks and spending an arm and a leg every month, here's the benefit of turning it into code. And we're also going to show how to break down existing templates and basically take the Lego bricks apart and be able to mix and match the exact integrations that you need. So you see in here all these little logos we've integrated in some way in this final template that we are actually going to take and fork. So this is the actual template we're going to be forking. The title, it's AI SDR Slackbot after Replit guides. I'm going to click remix, and then I'm going to come back and show what we are going to be building on top of it. The thing to keep in mind is that despite it being called an AI SDR, it's not an agent or like an employee officially. A lot of agents kind of just name themselves after common job titles. But basically the way it works, ours is more of like a workflow where we're going to be sending a message in Slack, having it search Apollo for the leads that we describe that we need. And then it's going to enrich those on Clay in our Clay API that if you haven't seen my previous video, we're going to use that Clay API to enrich those leads and get their email addresses and stuff. And then we're going to queue them up into SmartLead. For this episode, I think we're just going to get to this portion where we're going to build a Slack bot that you can message, get leads, and enrich them right from within the Slack bot. And then why is this different from an agent? If it was an agent, it would be a little bit more non-deterministic. So here's the difference between an agent and a workflow. A workflow is pretty straightforward. So if you're seeing a lot of videos right now where people describe that they built an agent in N8N, most of the time it's just a glorified workflow because it's very deterministic. It always follows the same step-by-step function, which is what we have here for our AI SDR. Don't get me wrong. But for an agent, it should truly be an AI agent. You have to have a large enough degree of non-deterministic decisions that the agent does on its own, that the LLM does on its own. So let's say, for example, if this was a true AI agent, AI SDR, then we would be able to send it any type of message, not just requests for leads. We'd be able to say, hey, can you send a Slack to this lead? And then it would kind of decide and like search the database or Clay to see if we've even reached out to that lead, and then decide whether it just jumps straight to SmartLead to send the email, or if it has to go and like go to Apollo, search for the lead, enrich it on Clay. And it kind of just decides which tools are appropriate to use and then for when, just depending on whatever message that we sent. And if we send a message and ask it to do something where it just doesn't have the tool or the ability to do it, then it should be able to message us back and tell us like, hey, I can't do this. Maybe on a future episode we'll build that, but for now, just want to make it clear that this is basically a workflow and we're focusing on creating cool software around workflows that convert into code. So back over to our code. The first thing that we want to do is we can start to ask it Q&A questions on like what code happens here, what functions are located in certain locations. So the first thing I like to say is like, what are the key APIs used throughout this project, and how are they used, how are they implemented, and in what functions and files are they located? I want a full report on the key API integration and everything I described above. And there we go. And then while we let that run, I am going to go and jump over to the starting point. So this is the end of a 6-part series. If we scroll down a little bit below the template, you'll see all these other parts. And in each of these, one new integration is created. You know, it's self-described on which integration and which ability is copied or created for each part of the AI SDR. So if you want the less full, less complex part of the AI SDR, you don't need like these, you know, some of these incorporated, then you can go back to earlier portions, which I'm going to do actually, because in part 1, this is the core piece where we set up and create our Slack bot, which is the most important part. So let's go ahead and create Slack bot. The first thing that we're going to do is go over to Slack apps dashboard. You click on this, and then we're going to create a brand new application. So we're going to create a new app. We're going to click from manifest, and then we're going to click our workspaces here. So in here, and then we're going to click on JSON. And down here in this guide, in the part 1 guide, we have the manifest file that will give us all of the settings that we need to configure so that we have the same AI SDR. So this is basically just a JSON file that contains all of the permissions that we'll need, including like it needs the ability to write and read messages, and all these permissions are kind of contained in here, as well as like the name and the description, which can all be changed later. But if you just want a quick start and do the exact same thing, just import that manifest file. Everything looks good. We're going to create, and then this is a temporary app. So these things that I'm about to share, I'm not going to keep up And I just want to say that because you definitely don't want to share these with anyone else. The first thing that we're going to hop down to is the install app. And then we're going to click install to our workspace. And then that should get us going. That gives us our bot user token, which is the first thing that we want to insert into our template. And then we're going to post that in here. And then the next thing that we're going to grab is the Slack app token. And let me go back over to the guide here. You'll need your Slack app token. Click on basic information. So we click on basic information. And what we're going to want is down here, the app level tokens, generate token and scope. We're going to call this AIS main. We'll just call it main token. And then we are going to add scope. We're going to write the only one we need to choose connections right. Generate that, copy it. You can see this one starts with X app and the other one was like X BOB. And then we're going to paste that in here, just double checking. Yep, that's our app token. And boom, that's it. So that's all we need to get started for Slack. So the real test is now we should be able to run it. And we're going to get errors because you can see we have all these API keys that are not filled in. So it's not going to send a successful response necessarily. So let's go ahead and hit run. And then that is already, because we clicked the install steps back up here, like you remember when we installed to our workspace, we should be now connected. And if we go to our Slack workspace, I have this channel bot testing that I like to use. What we're going to have to do is go to integrations, add an app, and then search for SDR bot. There we go. And let's see. Can I get 5 new leads? Boom. Awesome. So we have an error, and this is a good start. At least we're connected. We have a bot sending us messages. So the next thing that we're going to do, back to our report, is decide on the overall plan. We know we have a bot connected. Now let's actually add all of the implementation, and let's pick and choose. Like, we forked the final step, out of the 6-part series. It includes all of these integrations, the SmartLead and HubSpot and everything. Again, we're only going to go to the spot where we fetch leads from Apollo, pull them in, enrich them with Clay, and then just have like a CSV of enriched leads. We're not going to add the portion that we would implement to SmartLead and HubSpot just for the sake of time, because it's the same repetitive process in a sense. But if you have any questions, or if you want me to include those later on in a future video, feel free to comment below and then I'll take a look. But for now, just for everyone to get the idea of how you can code up and remove and add integrations that you need from an existing template, then we're just going to stick with the first 3. So in that case, we're actually going to go down to delete anything that's a SmartLead API or a HubSpot API need. And then the other thing that we're going to do is head down to the report and see it picks out Slack, Apollo, OpenAI, SmartLead, HubSpot, Clay, and then just general API authentication for each of these. And I'm going to say, can we remove any of the steps involved with HubSpot or SmartLead? We just want to create a Slack bot that will use Apollo and Clay to create a leads list right within our Slack bot. So any of the steps after that initial list creation, we don't need. So we don't need the HubSpot and SmartLead steps. Thanks. All right, there we go. That's going to kick things off. And while it's doing that, let's go over to our main file. This is the main brain, where the main thread or the main process for running the Slack app and all the choices in between. So like the message that we saw here where it says on it processing, if I go and search through main by hitting Command F and then on it processing, or rather I have to go on it processing. That one I did Command Shift F. Oh, on it processing. I did not write the exclamation point. You can see this is the app mention function. So this is what function is triggered when we app mention the Slack bot that we have, SDR bot. And then this is the first message that it sends. And then this is the logic where it kicks off. So the rest of this stuff, you can see it sends this say. So this is where it actually sends that acknowledgement message, and it did there. But then we have to go and actually build all this, like probably the run search leads. And we're going to ask the Replit assistant to build that out for us. Let's go over here. The first thing it did is like take a big chunk of all of these functions related to creating and queuing up the email sequence and then uploading leads to HubSpot. So like I said, if you guys are interested in seeing a future video on that, let me know. But for this case, we're just going to give the foundational steps and then that should give you all the tools and knowledge that you need to like go and implement them on your own if you want, including with just forking the same template that I started with. So let's give it a second here. You can see that one took a while. It got rid of 234 lines of code, which is quite a lot. And that's like because it's a lot of functions. That's it. We're just going to go ahead and hit apply. Simplified. Perfect. Awesome. So let's go back to secrets. I'm just going to add these Apollo API and OpenAI keys. Those are pretty self-explanatory. You have to go to your Apollo account, make sure you're subscribed at least to the lower tier, and then that will give you the ability to pull leads via API. But as you'll see in a second, it's not going to give us access to pull emails from the API directly. So that's why we have Clay, because we're going to get LinkedIn URLs and we need to use Clay to go and fetch the actual emails of those people. So we're going to demo that in a second. The one thing for Clay, I'm going to go grab those API keys from a project I had running before, so I can just like bring over the API keys. So Apollo, I'm going to save and add secret, and then OpenAI just the same. And then that leaves the trickier one, which is the internal Clay API. So let's go ahead and showcase that. Let's split screens. So again, I'm going to put this stuff over here on the right and this on the left. So the one on the left is the one that we're working on. This is our live bot that we got this message from, but an error. And then over on the right, again, this is where I was like just saving my API keys for later. I've imported those over, so we don't need that anymore. And now the other important part is this Clay API, which I built in a separate video. This is basically an API that wraps around this Clay table. And again, go watch that video. Now in this Clay API, what we're going to be able to do, you can see these are some test data that we actually sent, is we're going to send the name, the state, everything about the lead that we pull from Apollo, which includes the LinkedIn URL. And then using Clay's waterfall method, we're going to be able to go and find like their actual email addresses. So that's what we're going to be doing. Now we already have this Clay API built. Again, if you want to go build it, go to the other video and then go watch that. Or you can completely swap out the Apollo API portion and use some other API or some other enrichment or lead source that includes emails already. But for our case, we need emails. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the internal URL. I'm just going to run it in dev mode because it's not deployed. If I open deployments, I could just double check if this Clay API is deployed, and it's not. It's okay. As long as we have the REPL open, we can click run. But if you want to run this in production, you'll probably want to deploy it and then use that URL instead of running it in dev mode. Because when I'm running it and I'm using this replit.dev URL, then it'll shut down as soon as I leave this URL, and that hinder the SDR, at least their ability to enrich leads, completely useless because it can't access the Clay API. The other thing that I'm going to grab is this endpoint. So we have to be sure to add that at the very end. Clay API start. Perfect. And then the other thing that we want to grab is the internal API key secret. And then we're going to bring that in there. Awesome. Now we are going to stop. And then I want to rename it because I don't like this. Demo. And we'll leave it there. And then we're going to stop and then rerun our Slack bot. So now we're going to give it a test. It should have all of our API keys plugged in to do everything of the first 3 steps in our workflow. From we can query it and ask it for leads. It'll go to Apollo, grab those leads, shoot them over to Clay to get the email addresses and spit them back out, prepare them as a CSV that we can bring over to SmartLead or whatever external source that we want. So let's go give it a shot. All right, SDR bot. Can you find me 5 leads of marketing leaders that work at tech companies based in the US? Let's give it a shot. We should get on it processing, and it's taking a little bit longer, which is a great sign. Boom, here we go. And here you can see, if we scroll over, you can see the email is not unlocked because we're not on a high enough tier of Apollo, which means that's the reason why we need to import and use our Clay API that we have set up. So if we scoot back over here, we want to open Clay because this is where all the action is going to take place. And we're also going to just open up our console. So this is our running bot, and we can see all the logs of how it's like thinking and processing everything. I'm going to bring this over one more. We can see how it's thinking and processing. And now we're going to ask it to do the next step, which is enrich leads. Click enrich leads. And now it's shooting those all in. And it can see some errors. Enriching leads. So it looks like it's failing. So time to debug. Perfect. So the first thing that my hunch or my guess is, it's not even finding the request URL. So we're going to ask the assistant, let's just do a new chat for cleanliness. We could say, we are getting a 404 error when we try to enrich leads. In what format should our Clay API URL be within the secrets? And then I'm going to just paste in the error that we're seeing. And then back up to the top, we don't have to say, we can say, we are getting a 404 error when we try to enrich the leads. So what do I mean by what format should our Clay API URL be within secrets? You can remember back over to secrets. If I open secrets and the API URL, let's open this. So we have the base URL. If I click edit, we have the base URL, but I don't know if we should actually include this Clay API start because it might actually be hard coded in the code. So let's search for Clay or enrich. Let's go back over here. All right. So let's say based on the error you're seeing, the problem is within the Clay API URL format and your variables. Okay. So yeah. So you can see it's trying to do this thing where it's actually Clay linked into email. So it did hard code the wrong path. So let's go back over to this. Let's not implement that. So we're not going to hit apply all. The first thing that we're going to do is actually remove that hard coded path. We can say, actually, can we remove that hard coded path? And we want to remove this. Again, because it's very particular, our Clay API, the route to it, and again, can go back and reference our videos on API fundamentals and how, computers know where to route and call certain endpoints. So back in our Clay template, the API route is going to be the base URL. I should close this. The base URL, this is the base URL. And then this path, Clay API start. And right now, what was happening is this was hard coded. Instead, it was trying to call the base URL and then /Clay linked into email, which does not exist. We have Clay API start. So we want to remove that. And so, yeah, that looks good because you can see this Clay API URL variable, that was like the base URL. But then again, this path does not exist. So we've included the full base URL and the path right directly in the environment variable, which you can see it picked up here. So in this green part, this is what it's applying. It says use the API URL as provided in the environment variable, which is perfect. In our environment variable, the secret, we have both the base URL and the endpoint. So we can keep it as is. And then back over here, we can click apply all. And then this one change, this apply all just applies to this suggestion right here. This one line change where it's not calling this endpoint anymore. It's just going to call it directly from our secret. Now, stop, click rerun. Let's give it another shot. And let's start a fresh chat. SDR bot. Can you grab me 5 leads of marketing leaders working at tech companies based in the US? Let's open up a thread on it processing. Let's open up console where we can see it thinking. And this will be the first place where we see errors pop up that are signaled by our bot, or it might have already given them. Okay, so yeah, after it gives this final people query, it should spit out what Apollo gives us. And again, if we click on this, you can see we get LinkedIn URL, we get company name and like the person's name, the location, city, all good enough information. Like that's enough information for Clay to have a really good shot of finding their actual work email address. But because we're on the lowest tier and we're cheap, we don't want to pay for a higher tier for Apollo, then we still want the email addresses. We're already paying for Clay. So let's just use Clay. So let's enrich emails. No 404 errors. It says finding email. And then if we go over here, it should be sorted by, let's say, created at, let's say newest first. Let's refresh. Not seeing anything new pop up. So now we have to go over to the Clay API and search this console. And it looks like it did send them. Maybe I'm just not seeing it. Maybe there was a lot more. I probably just missed it. So it looks like it's kind of just hanging. Doesn't seem like it's calling the Clay table. So we air it out. What do we need to make sure we change? Here we go. So what I'm doing here is reconfiguring the Clay table, and we're going to go ahead and grab this one again, and then within secrets here. And then restart it. All right, we're going to restart both. All right, so we're going to test this. We're up and running again, both the Clay API and both the Slack bot. The real truth is going to be if it can fetch and enrich the leads. So let's try it again. Can you grab me a 5 lead list of marketing leaders working at tech companies based in San Francisco? A lead list of, say, 3 marketing leaders, or we'll say 10. And then here we go. Here we go. Here's a moment of truth, enrich leads. Let's go back over to our little logger. It's finding the email address. You can see this is the step after we clicked enrich leads. It's going through. That should be going through to the Clay API, and it's getting all of those. So you can see this is really cool. This is how 2 APIs are working hand in hand. The Slack bot is sending them over, and then this one is sending it over to the Clay API. And now this one is running. You can see these requests are coming in. And so it's using the Clay table as its own tool, as its own API, and sending back the enriched data to the bot so that the bot can build up its own CSV file. And all of this, we're just paying for the base layer of the subscriptions. Like we already had Clay, we're already paying for it. We're just incorporating that tool. All of these tasks, let's say we had thousands and thousands of leads. Usually workflow tools are going to cost you every single time you're just doing a simple request. For every single lead that you're running through and every single step, everything from the fetch from Apollo to every single row call to the Clay API. And then that's just like unnecessary. It's just like runtime. And now because we have this all self-hosted on Replit, we're not paying for any of those runs. We're already just paying for the base software that we're using, or rather the data providers. We're just paying for the base data providers, Apollo and Clay. And we're able to customize the workflow into this interactive bot where we can just get our own leads. So there we go. We got all of these. And the logic of the bot is basically made such that you only get the lead included in the CSV if an email is found. So let's say we had asked it for 10 people. If we only gotten 8 people with email addresses found in Clay, it looks like it hit all of them. You could see all these 200s where they found it. If it wasn't found, it would just come out as empty. But for all of these, they've all got work email addresses. And so we're able to include them. And let's say if it only found 8, then this final CSV would only be 8 lines. And I could go ahead, download this, and then I can use these enriched leads wherever I want. I'm going to ask it for another one. AI SDR bot. Can you grab me a list of 5 CTOs that are located in the East Coast of the United States? Here we go. On it, processing. And then our little AI SDR gets to work prospecting, and enriching people. But yeah, that is the basic rundown. And this might be anticlimactic, but when we first jumped in, the initial thing that we do, you can just simply first ask it to assess what the project has, all of the components within it. And then after you've asked the AI to assess just the breakdown of the project and kind of get a lay of the land, similar to how an engineer works, that's how any engineer works. When they're jumping into a coworker's code, that's the first thing they do. Then we can ask it to start making edit requests to the existing template. So really these 1-2 punches of prompting for first give the AI a chance to think through and get a lay of the land of the code, and then ask it to do the edits that you're looking for it to do. In our case, remove HubSpot and the SmartLead steps. That's all you need to go ahead and get started on any template or any large code base that you're working with. Because this extra chat, it's going to bring that into the context of this next message where we ask it to make the edits. So the same thing applies for if you're adding new APIs and integrations. First, you ask it, hey, take a look at this project and just take your best guess on the best place to incorporate, HubSpot. Like let's say you were coming back in here and you wanted to add HubSpot, or maybe you're using another tool like Salesforce. You first ask it, like this message would be, get the lay of the land of all the APIs that are being used. Are there any steps that are already incorporating or using a CRM? And then the next one would be like, okay, if there are already CRM APIs integrated in here, can we remove them and replace them with a Salesforce API integration? And then you give it all the documentation on Salesforce and your schema and how your table is set up in Salesforce, and then it'll go and do it. And then that's how you can start customizing these tools to start working on your own. And then, yeah, then you're off to the races. And this is the benefit of taking workflows, breaking them down into code, and making them and customizing them for your very own. So if you have any questions, or if you wanted to see more of like those second two steps that I left out for this video of like the SmartLead API and the HubSpot API, let me know. And then I'm happy to do a follow-up video and a part 2 on how to add those back in. But for now, that's all for today. Hope it was a good one.